Welcome to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. We bring you news and analysis from the front lines of the global struggle for social and economic justice. I'm your host, Brianna Griffith, and here's what's going down in your backyard and across the world. Welcome to People's Republic. My name is Brianna Griffith, and once again, we are, of course, covering the nationwide rebellion. Despite the fact that this has gotten less media attention in recent weeks, the reality is that the rebellion continues. The reality is that so many communities have not actually addressed, or the city leadership of so many communities, the elected city leadership, as well as the police, have not addressed the underlying concerns, and so the rebellion continues. I want to keep covering different cities across the U.S. and seeing both the commonalities and how things play out, as well as how things sort of differ, the specific issues that are at play in each of these communities. So this week we are going to be starting by talking about Atlanta, where protests have crystallized around many police killings, but specifically around Rayshard Brooks. So to talk about sort of the situation in Atlanta, we're joined now by Monica Johnson, who's an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation in Atlanta. Thank you very much, Monica, for coming on the show.
No problem. Glad to be on.
Can you tell us, basically, kind of start from the beginning as far as when sort of protests began to erupt? Was it sort of near the end of May there in Atlanta as well? And if you can just give us a rundown of kind of like how this thing has evolved over the month or so that it's been active.
Protests did start right about the weekend after George Floyd's killing in Minneapolis, and have continued since. They've been there's been at least one protest every day in different parts of the city this entire month.
Has there been a point at which things really kind of coalesced? Like, has there been kind of a high watermark yet, or have things stayed pretty consistent?
There are pops and bursts. Of course, things are more widely attended on the weekends. The Rayshard Brooks killing was one. Really, in the beginning, the first Friday was about a 5,000 person march around the city a couple times. So those are probably the flashpoints, but the numbers are not the same as they were in the beginning, but there still is consistent protests going on.
And so the Rayshard Brooks killing happened during this this nationwide series of protests, these nationwide uprisings against police brutality. This is another, I think, common pattern we've seen in every city, where even as the police face such massive criticism from all sectors, I mean, really all sectors of working class society, even as they face this kind of sustained street resistance, they still find time to conduct this police brutality. Can you talk a little bit about the Rayshard Brooks case? What made that such a kind of horrific injustice? I mean, as with all police killings are horrific injustices, but if you can just kind of give people kind of a reminder of what it is briefly that happened, and how, like, to me, what do you think, what do you make of this, the fact that this killing happened on June 12th in the midst of all this?
Right. So it was specifically pretty horrific because it was just like a regular, I think, Friday night going into Saturday. People were in, Wendy's drive-through and witnessed this murder. So it was just about 2 a.m. on that Friday night going into Saturday, and people saw it happen. So apparently Rayshard Brooks was in his car, I guess trying to sober up a bit, and apparently blocking the drive-through, and somehow it went from that to an outside the car struggle to him attempting to run away and being shot 3 times in the back. So there were people, the initial videos were someone's Instagram story. There were dozens of people out within like an hour of the killing, because it's in the midst of the widespread protests. So that definitely galvanized large sectors of people more so than it might have if we were not in this moment. So, just as many of us had been to protests in the days prior, seeing police brutalize us for just standing and chanting, and then for them to just brazenly kill a person as if this isn't going on, really hit a nerve for a lot of people.
I think there's also part of this that really is about the police killings and police violence in general as being sort of an intersection of many issues, but specifically sort of an intersection of race and a class, race and profits, race and capitalism. I mean, all of this kind of is a race and class issue, and I think the fact that police were killed or police were brought out to kill this man in front of kind of the site of capitalism, I think is also relevant to this. You see police over and over again, essentially protecting above all things private property rights. So they're not protecting and serving a community of working people. They're protecting and serving the ability of a business to continue to make money. That if there was a quote unquote crime that Rayshard Brooks committed, it was existing in a place where he was temporarily stopping the normal flow of commerce, the normal flow of profits. I'm wondering how people kind of see that in Atlanta. Do people see the connection there? And does that kind of factor into the fact that essentially like this Wendy's has become a site of protest?
Yeah, of course. So, Atlanta has this sort of this veneer of being a place where Black people can thrive, and it's a Black Mecca down here, and it's great, and our Black elected officials serve us and things of that nature. But people who live in and are from the city know that there's Black faces in the mayor's office and on the city council and on the police force, but the people are still oppressed. It doesn't make life any easier for people with underfunded schools, who have to exist on welfare, which isn't enough anyway. These things were organically coming out of people like early in the morning Saturday when I got there, because it's just inextricable. There's no, if this was like, just like a white dude or whatever, they'd have him pull his car to the side, let him sober up, drive him home, whatever. You can't imagine a white person, someone who isn't criminalized for not fitting in his role as wage slave, being killed for such an offense, a supposed offense. So it's very apparent to people that this is not, this is a Black neighborhood this happens in. This isn't how things go in Buckhead, a richer part of Atlanta. It's very evident here.
Because I think Atlanta is a very interesting case like that. We see these cities that are supposed to have some positive aspect about them, they're supposed to be various cities are considered progressive, or various cities have this or that about them. So, for instance, Austin, where this show is based, is considered to be a quote unquote progressive city, and yet anyone who lives here, or really anyone who knows anything about Austin, most people are aware at some sort of level that Austin, of course, has like this racism built into it, this whiteness and white supremacy built structurally into every aspect of the city and city administration. So for Atlanta to be a city that's seen as a very welcoming place for Black people, to still have this white supremacist capitalist system bearing down upon everybody, must certainly, reveal the kind of hypocrisies within that. I'm wondering kind of what issues in particular Atlanta has faced that might set it apart from kind of other major cities. Like, what are the particularities of Atlanta?
What comes to mind initially is the way the interstate system goes through Atlanta. So we have, I-75 going through the middle of the city proper, straight up and down, and I-20 kind of bisecting it from top to bottom. And these interstates broke up Black communities that were established before these interstates were put down. And now there's a stark difference in policing and resources, things of that nature, north or south of I-20. Just everyone knows that the east and the west side aren't as a clear cut dichotomy, but the way that the area, Atlanta's not a huge city, so the gentrification project that's well underway for much of the city, where we're painting it as this like cute, attractive place for young yuppies, whatever, to come to. All these places are like 10 minutes from the underfunded, underserved communities. So there's like this fear mongering around, oh, there's robberies, oh, this is the hood or whatever. One of the most attractive places in Atlanta is on the east side, near like the Beltline and all the things, these cute housing projects. But they call the Kroger over there the murder Kroger, because it's in an area that was up until like about 2008, 2010, was just a place that the majority no white people live. Now it has flipped quite starkly, but there's quite an issue of people are being pushed out, but lots of people remain in the city proper, and there's just like it's a 5 or 10 minute drive to stark differences in how the residents are treated, and when you encroach on those spaces, how you're seen, how you're criminalized.
Yeah, that sort of gentrification process is such a kind of omnipresent thing, and I wonder to what degree so much of this kind of sustained police violence that we've seen over the past couple decades also corresponds to sort of kind of the white, especially the yuppie class you're talking about, trying to take a lot of these cities now that suburbs have become such horrific and dreary places. The kind of visibility of police violence has corresponded to essentially this desire of the yuppie class, really, and the desire of big real estate as well, which is driving this, I think, as much as the yuppies, the kind of real estate that we don't hear about, sort of seeing this as a profitable enterprise to sort of quote unquote retake large American cities for essentially like the settler colonial class here and whatnot.
Oh, definitely. I think it's you see there's just like a sharpening of the tensions as like more and more housing developments are built. The Beltline that I mentioned earlier is like the shining example of New Atlanta and all the infrastructure and things, and it's just like a path that cuts through basically. Cuts east and west through the city for people to walk on. There's the cute ritzy restaurants. People are on their roller skates and things like that. Very idyllic. But this project initially planned or stated that it would add 10,000 units of affordable housing. And last I checked was just not even 1,000. They had destroyed or taken over lots of affordable housing units and had not kept their promise, as one might predict, to put out more. So, while it's hard to find a place in Atlanta as a poor Black person, with the way that it's rapidly trying to, I guess, modernize. And of course, we're in the South. Not horrific, but not very good public transport. So there's just a bunch of factors that make living in certain areas just starkly different.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to turn to some of the police tactics here that have been used, not only sort of against the protests, but that have been traditionally present within the Atlanta police system. So one of the things you mentioned in this talk you had given on kind of a national live stream from the situation, and it was later published on Liberation News.
Yeah.
So in this talk, in this article, you had mentioned something called Atlanta's Red Dogs. Can you tell us exactly what this is and what this says about police?
Yeah, so this was something I had heard about from various sources like rappers, and then people were organically talking about it at this Rayshard Brooks protest. There was, I think, from like the 80s to around 2008, 2010. There's this like task force that is meant to target Black communities, young Black men, and just sort of provoke them to fighting or something that they can call them in for. So you are like a kid, an adolescent, chilling in your neighborhood, and someone comes and provokes you, and then you get into a fight with them, and then you're in prison. So it's just really predatory. There's like countless numbers of people who have had cases against them because of this system.
So essentially, the police have justified their existence nationwide, really, and they've justified the kind of continuing bloating of police budgets, the expansion of the kind of police and carceral states, on the premise that supposedly there is so much crime that they are somehow required to step in and stop the violence. And yet we see this pattern within policing where police are often the people who are responsible for bringing this violence into existence. They go into communities, often undercover. In any other country where you have a quote-unquote undercover or plainclothes officer, you would call that secret police, and yet we don't call it secret police in this country. We just have undercover and plainclothes officers. So you have these police who essentially exist, or these agents of the state that exist to go and sort of provoke some sort of violence. You even see this at the federal level with groups like the FBI, who will often kind of encourage, or during the war on terror especially, were kind of encouraging people to sort of build these bombs. They'd find somebody, especially like in brown and Arabic, Iranian communities and whatnot, and try and encourage people to build bombs so that they could then step in and be the heroes and arrest them.
Right.
People who weren't interested in any sort of violence to begin with were provoked either through this kind of persuasion, or often provoked through violence by the state that was then used as the excuse to bring about this quote-unquote law and order, when in fact it seems that the agents of the state here, the police, the FBI, and these other kind of forces that are supposedly the police force within the U.S., they seem to be the ones that are actually provoking, in many cases, chaos, the absolute opposite of law and order. Austin itself had this kind of moment with Occupy Austin some years back, where I believe it was APD, the police department here in Austin, essentially infiltrated Occupy Austin, use their infiltration to encourage people to do something that they consider to be violent, and then use that as an excuse to arrest everybody. I think that just speaks so much about the nature of police as essentially doing the exact opposite of what people assume them to do. People assume that somehow they bring order, when in fact, in so many communities, they are the primary provocateurs of chaos. And it just speaks volumes. Are you seeing people who might have not otherwise realized that coming to terms with that in these sort of mass protests out in Atlanta?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of the people who are most affected by police violence are, already aware of this, and that's who I'm around the most. But I see definitely that people are, starkly aware of what has been done to them just for, holding an intersection in the midst of a national uprising. Like, it's just constant repression, constant, having to be on your toes to just, supposedly, if the system is legitimate, for our constitutional right to protest and to agitate for and speak our minds. That's supposed to be, enshrined in everything that the state does. But whenever we go to exert that right, we are repressed. So it's definitely had an effect on lots of people that, this is not justice. There's no violence or anything that these people are needed for, but they're here to provoke and to foment violence.
So I would say we have a time for kind of one more sort of segment of discussion, and one of the things I'd like to get into is this sort of issue of reform, how one quote unquote reforms the police, if one believes that to be possible, what sort of capitulations the city is making or not making. What's the situation in Atlanta? How has the city responded to the uprising? Have they attempted any sort of concessions? And do those concessions go far enough? Are they a step in the right direction, or do you see them as either sort of a distraction or an attempt to stave off kind of a larger and more revolutionary moment?
There's been relatively quick as the protests have gone on, arrests, firings of these police officers who were involved in killings, involved in overt moments of police brutality, involved in Rayshard Brooks killing specifically. These things were granted pretty early on in order to stave off anger. Really, the same day of Rayshard Brooks killing, the police chief resigned, which I guess is supposed to be something else for us to be happy about. I do, and subsequently we have seen that the police officers that were arrested for killing Rayshard Brooks have been let out on bail. So it has not done anything. It has not fixed the situation. And there's been a long-standing struggle in Atlanta to close the city detention center, which formerly had a contract with ICE, and basically just holds people for pretty much crimes of poverty. It's city ordinances, it's loitering or whatever. And people have a group here in Atlanta called Women on the Rise is formed and led by formerly incarcerated women and non-binary people, and has been pushing to get this jail closed. There's been overtures made that the jail will be closed. The mayor a couple times has said that we will close this jail, but it's been over a year now, and we still don't have a date for when the jail will no longer be in use. So the mayor, this class of Black people that are meant to be a symbol of progress here have they do a lot of lip service, but they aren't fulfilling what would actually help the people of Atlanta.
And do you think that they're kind of capable of making the systemic changes to the system? Like, do you think really that the police can be reformed into something that actually quote unquote serves a community, or is is this larger a system that is inherently sort of violent? What would that look like if for instance the police were defunded or abolished, as so many activists are calling for?
Well, of course, there's people have been trying to reform the police and these systems for hundreds of years at this point. If it was going to get to a humane situation, it would have been there by now. So there's no use in trying to reform the police. Calls to defund and to shift money from the police budget to social services, or in the case of the Atlanta City Detention Center, to reimagining that center to a place where people can get resources for jobs or homelessness, things of that nature, are good demands that can sharpen people's consciousness fighting for them. But we're not going to be able to reform out the racism that's a part of this system at all.
What is it that people need to do in order to see their demands fulfilled? I know that's a very large question to answer in a few minutes.
So I think it's imperative to remain in the streets, to remain with concrete demands, which I think that the movement in Atlanta, there's a need for reassessing that with concrete demands that people can struggle for and not be distracted by these piecemeal you know, like small pieces of bread that we are handed by the mayor and such. Just because the police chief resigned, just because the police officers who are part of these specific killings were fired, does not mean that the types of killings won't happen again. It doesn't change the culture that thinks that says that if you're in the way of commerce, you deserve to be criminalized or killed. It does none of that. So it's imperative to stay in the streets to definitely focus on a specific political message, a systemic, a system-wide political message that isn't just focused on the police in Atlanta. It's focused on the entire system, because the entire system is what allows us to be, oppressed by the police in this way. The people know that they wouldn't have the same interactions with police if they were rich Black people. So these things are all tied together, and that has to be the explicit message in these protests for them to go in a way that can lead us to actual systemic change.
I think that's a good place to go ahead and wrap up. We're going to wrap up there. We were joined for this segment by Monica Johnson, who's an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation based in Atlanta. Thank you very much, Monica, for coming on the show. And I also just want to let people know that Monica's article, How Atlanta Community Organized After Police Murdered Rayshard Brooks, is available on Liberation News, is adapted from a speech that you gave. Thank you very much, Monica, for coming on the show.
Thank you, Brianna. Talk to you later.
Yeah, you're listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. People's Republic originates on KOOP 91.7 FM Austin, and is also broadcast on WHIV 102.3 FM New Orleans. We are available as a podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are podded. Stay tuned. Welcome back to People's Republic as we continue to cover the nationwide rebellions. We turn now to Denver, where the kind of story, especially around Aurora, Colorado, which is outside of Denver, has made kind of national headlines for the brutality of police actually attacking a concert there with tear gas and whatnot, taking a kind of peaceful protest and just attacking protesters, attacking musicians with tear gas, among the other kind of fights against police brutality that have been going on in Denver. So to talk about all that, to talk about the situation in Denver, we are joined now by Eliza Lucero, who's an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Thank you very much, Eliza, for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Some people might be familiar with Elijah McClain, but if you can tell us, first of all, like, just because this is the more breaking news story, the brutality here around kind of how the police have attacked peaceful protesters in Denver, or in Denver and in Aurora as well.
Yeah, for sure. So Elijah McClain, a name that kind of has gone viral in the past couple weeks, was a 23-year-old Black man walking home from a corner store dancing, who was brutally murdered, drugged and murdered by the Aurora Police Department back in August of 2019. People have really erupted in anger over this in the current climate against police brutality that's, sweeping across the globe at the moment. So last Saturday, there was a march in his honor called by PSL that brought out 5,000 people, thousands and thousands of people who showed up. It was, a march earlier in the day, and then was to be concluded with a violin vigil. Some famous violinists wanted to honor Elijah, who also was a violinist himself, a really peaceful man, by holding this vigil, at sunset. So people had gathered on the lawn outside of the Aurora Municipal Center to hear this music and just to honor his short life that was taken far too soon. And the cops had declared the action unlawful, saying that the protesters and those who had gathered for the vigil were defying public safety orders in light of coronavirus, However, everyone there had masks on, and but they used this, declaration of an unlawful gathering to storm in full riot gear, and tear gas, use a chemical weapon on like mothers, fathers, children, like everyone that was just sitting on the lawn trying to honor Elijah McClain's life. A really, really dystopian sight to see cops marching in on either side, surrounding the crowds, tear gassing musicians and families.
So much of this, as we've talked about over and over and over again, is revealing kind of the nature of police, that it doesn't matter kind of how one responds to police, how one kind of fits into the kind of respectability politics that people for so long have been expected to uphold. Basically, you're always expected to quote unquote respect cops or whatnot. With Elijah McClain, with so many others, the just complete deference in the face of police that Elijah showed, and then sort of just the complete peaceful nature of people's protests in Aurora has not mattered one bit, because the nature of police is ultimately the violent suppression of sort of class resistance to the status quo, whatever form that may take, and obviously racial resistance as well to status quo. Black people being sort of an oppressed, especially oppressed class, and especially oppressed group within the United States. At this stage in the development of the protest movement, or in the nationwide rebellion, there's kind of, I feel that there's this kind of sense to bring more clarity to the demands, bring more clarity to sort of the struggle, as opposed to the spontaneous uprisings we were seeing in the very early days. I know PSL in Denver has played sort of a role in that. Can you talk about what kind of role the PSL has played in Denver, and what sort of interventions you've been trying to make?
Yeah, for sure. So Denver, like the hundreds of other cities around the globe, really went into an uproar, after the footage depicting George Floyd's death went viral. Tens of thousands of people were coming out throughout the days in the recent weeks following that. And as the struggle went on, it became really clear that there was no specific organization pulling everyone together and focusing demands, making it really, a clear, unified message of what we want. So the Party for Socialism and Liberation was kind of able to step in to shed more light on, the roots of systemic racism being capitalism, and the role of the police as tools of the state, but also to shed light on, cops. This is not just, this police brutality isn't just an issue that is happening in Ferguson or Minneapolis or in Louisville. Like the police, this is what they do. This is in their nature. This is everywhere. So PSL was really able to shed light on the killings that have happened by Denver police and the Aurora police, since those two organizations are, in the top 25% of killer cops in the country. So we brought a message to shed light on the death of William DuBose, a 21-year-old Black man who was being pulled over for speeding, that resulted in him being shot multiple times by the Denver Police Department. Ryan Ronquillo, who was 20 years old, murdered by the Denver Police Department. Jesse Hernandez, 17 years old. Alexis Mendez, who was only 16 years old, who was killed by a law enforcement officer off duty for who was like just running through his neighborhood. So, we really felt the urgent need to bring attention that the police are always terrorizing and they're always a murderous force. It doesn't matter where they are. They're globally despised because they are a tool of a capitalist state everywhere in the whole world.
Yeah, and what attempts have there been to kind of really reform the Denver Police Department? What has that struggle kind of looked like? And do you think that there's been kind of a shift in consciousness within workers, within kind of oppressed people in Denver?
Yeah, for sure. So this has been an amazing time seeing for people to realize that reforms are are not the answer. Like, there's been plenty of, empty platitudes and reform rhetoric coming from our governor, Denver City Council, the mayor, and people know that that's not it. We're asking to, defund the police, to abolish the police force. We're not asking for anything else. There's been several bills and measures that have, they voted to take the Denver police force out of schools, which is awesome. Why should there be police officers terrorizing children in schools? However, that's not going to get cut to the root of the problem. People are really understanding what systemic racism means, which means that it is a part of a bigger system, and to try to reform that system is pointless.
Yeah, because ultimately a reform, what people don't realize is a reform is something taking on another form when you really break down the word. Ultimately, if you don't understand that sort of what the nature of a police system is, how it evolved, police in the U.S. essentially evolved out of two roots, and those were kind of the union busting movement, where essentially the kind of early bourgeois class within the U.S. Would sort of hire out these private mercenaries to go and conduct surveillance on working class communities, and kind of bust up early versions of unions or worker solidarity. And then the other root of that, of course, is the slave patrols, the kind of people who would try and find Africans who had liberated themselves and send those Africans back into slavery. So that essentially is the nature of police. And when you talk about kind of reforming the police, for a long time, I think there was this conversation. It's like, oh yeah, sure, the police were bad, the police were racist in this time, in that time, etc. But they've changed, and my kind of response to that has always been, well, if they've changed, if the police system has changed since the 1950s, since the civil rights movement. If the police have really kind of radically reformed, where exactly did that reform happen? And when were all of those people who were part of that old system systemically fired? And anywhere in the country, I don't think you really have that. There was never a point at which all of the people, again, assuming police can be reformed, there was never really a point at which that reckoning was had. And so, anyone who's been anyone who's really tried to conduct this systemic change knows that as long as you have those same kind of people in power, if you don't kind of actually root that out, you essentially wind up with that same system replicating itself in a kind of more complex and sometimes not quite as clear-cut forms. I think we've seen kind of the exhaustion of the police reform movement within sort of the 5 or 6 years since the emergence of what's called the Black Lives Matter movement. The things that came to the forefront there in the Black Lives Matter movement would be, again, these are the reform. This is the reform side of things. Would say things like, "Oh, we need community policing, we need body cameras, etc." But what we've seen over and over again is that community policing has simply meant more police in Black and brown communities, or conducting surveillance in Black and brown communities. It means more money for PR campaigns. When we talk about the body cam part of that, it simply means that police have become walking surveillance cameras that they can then use the footage to conduct surveillance against protesters later, etc. The body cams have this mysterious problem where they always seem to shut off whenever there's an actual accusation of police brutality. Some body cams have caught police actually, for instance, trying to plant drugs on suspects or whatnot. But generally, the body cams have not slowed the rate of police violence or brought more accountability to the movement, because the system itself stays the same. And I think the third leg there, as far as police, again, quote unquote, reforming, this idea that we can have a more just police system, would come from the idea of, we need to retrain officers. Well, at this point, the idea that any officer is just engaging in some sort of subconscious racial bias with all of this, and that can be sort of trained out with reform, is absolute nonsense, because so many cities have already, to use a specific example of something that is either being banned or people are being retrained on, chokeholds. We've seen a lot of cities already ban chokeholds by police departments, where police then continue to use chokeholds and kill people. So police are across the country right now expressing an absolute disregard for even the most minor civilian reforms, even when those civilian reforms really did not accomplish what they said they were going to set out to. The police have just essentially, they have been the unlawful force, I think, across the country. They have been the ones who when we talk about, kind of restoring quote unquote law and order, they've been the ones who have acted without any sort of regard for, I think, public safety or quote unquote law and order, because they're ultimately the law that they're enforcing is not people's law. It's the law of the ruling class. It's the law of white supremacists. And the order they're enforcing is the order of profits over people. I'm wondering if you just have either some general thoughts on that, or if you want to respond to any of that, or if you'd like to talk about how that kind of played out in Denver and Aurora as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything you've said, of course, is dead on. We know that the cops are acting above the law all the time. The courts, talking about the system, the courts are still also serving the ruling class, which includes cops. So the cops are acting above the law, we see constantly that body cam footage doesn't hold anyone accountable. It's also it's even hard for us to get police units to release their body cam footage if it is available. So body cams aren't doing anything. Illegal chokeholds are still killing Black people across the country all the time. So the problem is cops are acting above the law, and you can't really reform that. We saw this recently in Denver with the case of William DuBose, when we fought to get that body cam footage released. And when they did release it, the cops had gone in and, doctored it up, really dark, really blurry, happened at night, but had doctored, red circles around what they were trying to say was, a weapon, or, him moving his arm in some certain way. But we know that the cops aren't seeing they're not seeing this play out in a slow motion reel with red circles drawn around things. So the body cam footage showed nothing other than the fact that, police officers have way too much time on their hands to doctor videos to try to fit their stories. But police reforms, I think the people have really had it. No one, at least in Denver, from what I've seen from, the massive protests, is saying we need police reforms. We need illegal chokeholds. They're saying we need to defund the police immediately. The police are not keeping us safe. And there's so many things that our city does not put money towards that could keep us safe, like housing and healthcare and education. Denver has 7 failing schools. There's so many other things that are underfunded in Denver. We don't need police officers to keep us safe. We need those things.
How has the city council, I know we talked about this a little bit, how has the city council really responded? Is the city council considered fairly progressive there, or city, just general, the sort of city and I guess to a lesser degree also the state civilian government, are they trying to sort of posture as being progressive? Are they just not caring? And how is that being received?
Yeah, the city council in Denver, as well as the mayor, even the governor of Colorado, are all considered progressive types. We have a gay governor like Jared Polis, and despite the city council being liberal or progressive, we have not seen. They still have refused to listen to the people in general. I mean, they canceled their last city council meeting on Monday because the week before protesters showed up and, demanded that their voices be heard by city council. So they canceled their meeting the next week in a complete act of cowardice, and have really refused to even talk about what defunding the police would look like with us, with the exception of, a couple council members, namely Candy Citibaka of Denver. But even in these progressive type circles, we can still see that they're still working under the system of the ruling class. They don't work for us. They don't work for the people. They won't even listen to us. So it's been really eye-opening for, I think, a lot of the citizens of Denver that they're not getting heard.
Was it Denver where when the city council did not meet, the city council declined to meet, that people held then kind of their own council meeting? Was that Denver that took place in? I seem to remember something like that happening.
Yeah. So as soon as city council said that they were not going to meet, PSL called a town hall immediately and said, okay, well, if you're not going to meet, we're still going to talk. You're still going to hear us. We had plenty of news coverage, just to hear from concerned people in the community who had planned on going and voicing their ailments to city council. But yeah, it was really outrageous. But the people still showed up, and the message was still heard loud and clear.
And what sort of message was that? Like, how was that really received?
Yeah, so the message ultimately is defund the police, and also people were really, really angry that city council had canceled their meeting. So the message was even clearer that, like, they don't work for us. They clearly don't work for us. When we say I think a message that I heard from several people was, the system is not broken. You hear that a lot. The system is broken. The system is messed up. But a message I was hearing from several people is, the system is not broken. The system is working exactly how it's supposed to. And that is to keep the majority of people disempowered, to keep cops patrolling and controlling our communities, and to keep serving the priorities of, private property and, law and order, as Donald Trump has said.
There's so much here that I think is very instructive as far as how to kind of reach out to people who have been abandoned by kind of the city forces that be, or other kind of reformist forces that don't really that will prioritize kind of their political positions over I guess the well-being of people generally. Like, they'll talk a big game. So many kind of forces, whether that's nonprofits, whether that's the city, these, again, like municipal governments, whether that's state governments, often talk sort of a big game, especially the Democratic side of things. The corporate liberal side of things will always talk sort of about these necessary safety, these progressive measures. But when it comes time to actually do the thing, when it comes time to make the real systemic changes, they're nowhere to be heard. And I think this is instructive in Austin as well, where city council had a virtual meeting where they heard at one point hours and hours, an entire day of testimony from hundreds of citizens in Austin, overwhelmingly saying, defund police. The police are violent. The police are brutal. The police have acted recklessly. They don't care about even the laws, like the most basic regulations on themselves. They obstruct justice again. And so over and over again, like, people testified for hours and hours, and Austin City Council followed that up by voting to increase the police budget, by giving the police essentially more grant money under the guise of car theft, that they need to prevent car theft. Well, the amazing thing is, like, I had a friend here who was actually with a friend whose car got broken into, and this is after the grant money was approved for this car theft, this car theft program or whatnot. This is supposedly why the police needed more money. And so after this happened, a friend of mine was sitting with her friend waiting for the police, like, to investigate, like, her car theft, or to investigate the friend's car theft or whatnot. And, like, they finally showed up hours later, I think, and said there's nothing that they can do. Because, again, like, the police aren't really concerned with that sort of thing. They're concerned with, like, enforcing these class relations or whatnot. But, like, to me, the absolute arrogance of these city governments to say they're so progressive, to say they care so much, and then, like, in the case of Denver, we just abandon people. We would just not have the conversation, shut down the conversation, or in Austin, even go a step further and give more money to these oppressive forces, I think speaks volumes about the fact that, like, when we talk about system change, when we talk about abolition of police, these are not the forces that are going to get this done. These are not the forces that we can rely on at all to enforce this. But in fact, it is the people's movement, is the uprising in the street that has forced this conversation, that has forced the entire national conversation in, I guess what we call, quote unquote, leftward, but in fact a police abolitionist direction. When city council, for instance, of Denver decides not to have a meeting, decides to shut down the conversation, it's inspiring to me, I guess, to see people step in, to see a group like PSL Denver step in and say, this is our meeting now. If you're not going to have this conversation with people, we're going to have this conversation with people. And I think that's what needs to happen if we want to get past this sort of like the roadblocks of quote unquote reform into something really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that, think of all that we've accomplished. I mean, already just in the past month, and also like how scared we've made local governments and nation governments, like just from being massive people in the streets, outraged. Like we've made strides already, to pass, ultimately it's been reform, but they're starting to listen, for the first time ever. Like they're realizing that they have to listen, because people in the streets is going to be like the only thing that creates the type of change that we need to see ultimately. Like as I've said before, like several times, like our governments don't work for us, and that's become really apparent. So the only thing that is going to work is massive uprisings, massive rebellions. One of a really popular chant, I guess, that we've been hearing in the streets, is, what do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. If we don't get it, shut it down. Like, this is what shutting it down looks like. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take, massive amounts of people shutting this system down for the change that we need for revolution to take place.
Is there anything else you'd just generally like people to know about the situation within Denver that's kind of not being covered correctly by the corporate media?
Oh man, what is being covered correctly by the corporate media? I guess I think that a big narrative that keeps coming out from Denver is that there's they keep trying to separate peaceful protesters from rioters. Like everywhere we go to protest, all the windows are boarded up. When we went to Aurora on Saturday, every single building was boarded up. The cops had blocked off all of the parking lots around the municipal center because, try to discourage people from showing up. They couldn't find parking. And, but like this distinguishing between peaceful protesters and quote unquote rioters is absolutely not correct. Like there's nothing correct about it. There's not people necessarily trying to riot, but we will make our voices heard. So if the corporate media wants to spew off, any sort of inconvenience that the protesters are causing to everyone else's life as a riot, that's absolutely outrageous. Like, when we took a highway last Saturday, they said that we were rioting on the highway. Like, we're not rioting on the highway. We're peacefully protesting and marching on a highway. And the corporate media spews it as that because, they're upset that someone's commute was ruined on their way to work or something. So this distinguishing between peaceful and rioters is really detrimental to the movement in itself. Like there is no such distinction.
Yeah, I can't even begin to tell you how destructive that dichotomy has been to the protest movement here in Austin as well. This idea, again, that there's like these two camps going on, that there's some of these people who want to protest the quote unquote right way, but then these violent agitators, these outside agitators, these awful people, according to the corporate media. And this dichotomy, this idea that you either have to be completely docile or you're just a quote unquote like violent outside agitator, that does not hold up with anyone I've spoken to at any of these uprisings. That's not something that people ascribe to. That's entirely sort of a way to try and divide, to try and smear, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, after all, it was Martin Luther King himself who said that a riot is the voice of the unheard. And so, like, if Martin Luther King himself was not disturbed by the prospect of riots, then nobody else needs to be anyway. It doesn't need to, like, this specter of quote unquote rioting doesn't need to be brought up. But again, this isn't a riot. This is a rebellion. There's an uprising. I played that a speech by Eugene Puryear on the show a few episodes ago to that point. But yeah, I think that's a good place to go ahead and wrap it up. For this segment, we were joined by Eliza Lucero, who's an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation based in Denver. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
That's all we have for this week. You have been listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. People's Republic originates in Austin, Texas, and is also available as a podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are podded. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at People's Radio ATX for more news and analysis. We are out of here.